It didn't start with a dramatic betrayal. It started with little moments, missed calls, unspoken apologies, sudden coldness where warmth used to live. The person you believed in began to fade, not with an explosion, but with a quiet, consistent absence. That's what hurt the most. Not the moment they broke your trust, but all the small, calculated ways they chipped away at it until it no longer held weight. You tried to justify it. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe it was your fault. Maybe if you just held on a little longer, gave them a little more time, they'd remember how to care. You weren't asking for the world. You were asking for effort, presence, truth. But what you got was silence. Heavy, sharp, intentional silence. You gave loyalty that never wavered. You were there on their worst days, during their emotional storms, when they didn't even have the words to ask for help. You showed up, and when it was your turn, when your world started to crack, they vanished. Not physically at first, but emotionally, spiritually, and soon it became obvious. They had checked out long before you gave yourself permission to stop hoping. You felt it in your gut, in the way you stopped recognizing your reflection. You were tired, not the kind that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from constantly loving someone who doesn't see you. You started questioning if maybe you asked for too much, if maybe your standards were too high, but they weren't. You asked for the bare minimum and were handed excuses instead. The shift wasn't instant. It crept in slowly. First, confusion, then denial, then numbness. You stopped reacting, not because you didn't care, but because you had nothing left. You weren't quiet because you were okay. You were quiet because your energy was drained from trying to save something that was already gone. Silence became your language, not because you forgave everything, but because you no longer wanted to explain your pain to someone who made you feel guilty for feeling it in the first place. There were nights you stared at your phone, replaying conversations, rereading messages, hoping to find something you missed, some sign that you weren't going crazy, that you weren't the one who ruined it. But the truth was never hidden. They just never wanted to speak it. They were done long before you allowed yourself to accept it. And they didn't offer closure because they didn't want to take accountability. They wanted to disappear quietly, leaving you to pick up the pieces and wonder what went wrong. You could have retaliated. You could have exposed them. You had the receipts. You had every reason to lash out, to tell the world how they pretended, how they manipulated, how they drained you and wore your loyalty like a trophy until they were bored. But you didn't. Not because you didn't hurt, but because you realized their actions said more about them than your silence ever could. You could have become what they expected, bitter, vengeful, loud. You could have given them the chaos they projected onto you. But something inside you resisted, because even through the betrayal, you knew your power was never in destruction. It was in restraint. You were already broken. Why break yourself more to prove a point to someone who no longer mattered? You took every ounce of heartbreak and tucked it away, not to ignore it, but to fuel something greater. You stopped asking for their side of the story. You stopped chasing clarity from people who couldn't be honest with themselves. You let go, not because it didn't matter, but because it was destroying you to hold on. And that was the moment everything changed, when you stopped needing revenge and started needing yourself more. That pain, that heartbreak, that silence, they became the foundation. Not for a comeback rooted in rage, but one rooted in rebuilding. You could have fought back with fury, but instead you fought back with growth. You looked at the ashes and said, "Now I build." Not for them to see, not to prove anything, but because you knew your peace was more powerful than any apology you were never going to get. They didn't just betray you. They underestimated you. They thought you'd fall apart and stay there. They didn't count on your ability to rise in silence, to grow when no one's watching, to become something so strong that the very idea of trying you again would be a mistake. And now, when they see you, they won't see the pain they left. They'll see the person they can't touch. Not because you got revenge, but because you didn't need to. Because your comeback speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Because walking away without a word was the loudest statement you've ever made. And that silence, it still echoes where your name used to be. Revenge always feels tempting when you're hurting, when you're sitting in the wreckage of something that meant everything to you, when betrayal stings like open skin in salt water. Your first instinct is to strike back, to make them feel just a little of what they made you feel, to serve them silence, lies, rejection, even disrespect, and call it justice. But the truth is, revenge only gives a brief rush, a flash of satisfaction, followed by an even heavier emptiness. Because the person you want to hurt isn't thinking about the pain they caused you. They're thinking about how to justify what they did, even to themselves. And you chasing payback only confirms their version of the story. It tricks you. Revenge looks like power when it's actually bondage. You tell yourself that hurting them back will heal you, that exposing them or making them jealous will balance the scale. But it doesn't. It just ties you to them longer. You end up reacting, calculating, checking for signs that they noticed you won. You keep them alive in your world by turning every move into a message for them. You don't move on, you orbit. Your entire rise becomes a performance, a display, and somewhere in the middle of it, you lose the authenticity of your growth. Now you're not healing because you need to. You're healing because they need to see it. That's the trap. It feels like control when it's really dependency. You say you're over them, but if everything you're doing is designed to be seen by them, you're still living in reaction to them. That's not peace. That's obsession disguised as empowerment. And it's exhausting because it steals your energy, your clarity, your purpose. You spend so much time trying to teach them a lesson that you forget to teach yourself the truth. You don't need them to feel pain to feel better. The most dangerous lie we tell ourselves is that justice comes from making others suffer. But real justice comes from becoming untouchable, not through cruelty, but through elevation, through a life they no longer qualify for. When you stop caring whether they see your glow up, that's when the glow hits hardest. When your focus shifts from them to you, from proving to evolving, that's when everything changes. Because now you're building something real, not something curated for attention or validation. They left, they lied, they betrayed. That says everything about them. But what you do next, that says everything about you. Revenge turns you into a mirror of their behavior. Growth turns you into something they can't reach. You don't rise by throwing stones. You rise by building. Build your mind. Build your routine. Build your income. Build your peace. Make them irrelevant by creating a world where they no longer fit. Not because you're petty, but because your standards changed. And no, it won't feel fair at first. They hurt you and walked away like nothing happened. They moved on while you sat in pieces. You stayed loyal while they stayed selfish. But fairness doesn't always show up how we want it. Sometimes it doesn't arrive through revenge. It arrives through time, through the slow but steady progress that turns you into someone they can't access, through the silence that grows louder than any insult you could have thrown back. Let them live with what they did. You don't need to remind them. Life has a way of bringing people face to face with their own reflection. The same lies they told you will come back through someone else. The same neglect, the same games. They don't go away. They follow patterns, and patterns always repeat. Sooner or later, they'll feel it. Maybe not from you, maybe not today, but karma doesn't need your hands to do its work. It only needs your absence. Focus on becoming. Let the pain refine you, not into something bitter, but into someone bold. Let your growth be so silent that they feel it in their chest without you ever saying a word. Not because you sought revenge, but because you walked away and never looked back. Because you realized your peace was never worth trading for payback. You don't need revenge. You just need to stop shrinking for people who don't know how to hold what's real. Your comeback isn't loud. It's silent, focused, undeniable. There comes a moment when the silence around you stops feeling like punishment and starts sounding like clarity. That's when it hits you. Not all at once, but in small, painful bursts. The texts you never got back, the apologies that never came, the explanations that were owed to you but never offered. At first, it breaks you. You keep replaying conversations, reanalyzing your actions, wondering if there was something more you could have done. You think maybe if you were softer, maybe if you held on tighter, they would have stayed. You spend nights trying to make sense of what they never had the courage to say, and in doing that, you forget your own worth. But healing doesn't come through their answers. It starts when you stop asking, when you stop placing your value in hands that never knew how to hold it in the first place. The day you stop waiting for closure is the day you begin to reclaim your power. You start understanding that silence is also a form of communication. They chose not to speak. They chose not to show up. And that choice, as hard as it is to accept, was loud enough. There's a brutal kind of freedom in taking responsibility, not for what they did, but for how long you allowed their absence to keep you frozen. It's not your fault they failed to see your worth, but it is your job to stop giving people chances to ignore it. Accountability is where healing starts, not because you were wrong, but because you're ready to move differently. You stop blaming them for your brokenness and start asking yourself, why did I stay so long after it was clear they stopped caring? That question is hard. It cuts through your ego, through your excuses, and forces you to face the parts of yourself that allowed the hurt to linger. But it's also the beginning of everything, because once you realize you were always the one holding the power, even when it felt like you were powerless, you shift. You stop chasing validation. You stop needing them to see you, to recognize your effort, to regret what they did. You stop needing them to feel bad just so you can feel better. That kind of growth isn't loud. It doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like tears in your car. Sometimes it looks like blocking a number you once waited on. But every time you choose your peace over your ego, you're taking your power back. Self-awareness isn't pretty at first. It forces you to see how much you compromised just to keep certain people. You remember the times you silenced your own needs to avoid being too much. You remember how you bent until you broke just so they wouldn't leave, and then it hits you. They were never staying for the real you. They stayed for the version of you that made their life easier. But that version wasn't sustainable. It was survival. And survival mode isn't where you build love. It's where you learn to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't hand you a bandage. Eventually, the chaos begins to quiet. You no longer react to their absence. You no longer check who viewed your story or what their new person looks like. You start choosing solitude over forced connection, peace over fake consistency. You become less concerned with being remembered by them and more focused on remembering yourself. You rebuild your routine, your boundaries, your sense of self. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you're tired of feeling disposable in your own life. The power was never in getting revenge or making them regret it. The power was in realizing you don't need anyone to complete what was always yours to own. You are not defined by the love they didn't give. You are not broken because they couldn't stay. That realization doesn't hit all at once. It arrives slowly, through quiet mornings where you feel less heavy, through interactions where you no longer shrink, through choices where you finally come first. And when it does land, fully and unapologetically, it's not loud, it's solid. It's a knowing in your chest that you are no longer waiting, you are moving, and that's what changes everything. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout. It doesn't need a crowd. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, through silence, through control, through choosing not to respond when everything in you wants to scream. Silence is not weakness, it's precision. It's knowing your energy is currency, and not everyone deserves to spend it. They expect a reaction. That's how they win. They feed off it. Your rage, your breakdown, your desperate attempts to be understood. They want you to respond, to beg, to explain. That's their game, because it gives them relevance. It puts them at the center of your world again. Even in conflict, they want control. They want to know they still affect you. But when you don't react, when you go quiet, it unsettles them. They don't know where you stand. They can't predict your next move. Silence makes them sit with their choices, without distraction, without your voice to blame. It's in that silence that the truth begins to echo. The guilt starts to grow, and they hear it in their own mind, over and over again. There is power in not replying, in not clarifying what they already know they did, in not playing defense against twisted facts. Your silence speaks. It says, I saw everything, and I don't need to say a word. That cuts deeper than any insult, because it shows restraint, control, self-respect. Loud pain is easy to dismiss. People cry and rage and say things they don't mean. It's dismissed as drama. But quiet pain, controlled silence, it lingers. It forces them to think, forces them to face themselves. And they don't like that, because now there's no distraction from what they did. Silence flips the script. It puts you in charge. You're no longer reacting to them. You're protecting your peace. You're choosing you. And that burns. Because nothing confuses a manipulator more than someone who stops playing. They expect chaos. You give them calm. They expect noise. You give them distance. They spiral. They reach out. They try again. But you're no longer available. Not emotionally. Not mentally. They poke, trying to find the old version of you. The one who would chase, who would plead. But that person is gone, replaced by someone who knows their worth. Silence becomes your weapon, not for harm, but for clarity. It cuts through the noise, shows who was real, who was using you, who panics when you go still, who can't sit in the space without manipulating it. And the longer you stay quiet, the more it speaks. It's not about ignoring them out of pride. It's about honoring yourself, saying, I will not lower my peace for your chaos. That peace is sacred, earned through nights you cried without answers, through mornings you woke up still aching, but chose to carry on. You become untouchable in your stillness. They don't know what's next. They can't read you. That makes them uncomfortable. It makes them reflect. And that's where your power lies. In reflection they can't avoid. In knowing you no longer respond because you've outgrown their noise. Your silence isn't just absence. It's presence in its purest form. It's energy being redirected into building, into healing, into growth. You speak through action, through progress, through a glow they didn't expect. And when they see you winning without them, they feel the weight of their mistake. Not because you said it, but because you didn't have to. The absence of your voice becomes louder than anything you could have said. It lingers in the places where your presence used to be. It haunts their feeds, their thoughts, their memories, because they know what they did, and now without your noise they're alone with it. That's why silence is the new weapon. It doesn't hurt through noise. It wounds through evolution. It confuses. It humbles. It shows growth they didn't think you had in you. And the best part, they can't stop it. They can't respond to what isn't said. They can't twist it, can't gaslight it. It's silence. It's real. It's yours. And it's powerful. They thought you'd stay down. They thought you'd fall apart and never get up. They thought the silence they gave would shatter you, that you'd chase them, break, beg. What they didn't see coming was the grind. The kind that doesn't start loud, the kind that starts alone, in pain, in darkness, at rock bottom, where there's no applause, no reassurance, no one watching, just you, waking up tired, waking up hurt, but still waking up and showing up. At first it was slow. The bed felt heavier than your body, the thoughts louder than the alarm, but something inside kept whispering, keep going. You didn't have a clear plan, just raw pain. So you picked something, anything, a run, a cold shower, 5 minutes of stillness. You started stacking small wins, not because you were healed, but because you had no choice. Sitting in that version of yourself any longer was killing you. Your body was weak, but your will was growing. Every rep at the gym became a scream without sound. Every drop of sweat was emotion being burned off. The rage turned into movement, the heartbreak into fire. You didn't lift for aesthetics. You lifted to carry yourself out of the place they left you in. Your workouts became therapy. You didn't need permission to rebuild. You just started. The hunger hit different. Not for food, for progress, for power, for control over the chaos. You stopped checking their socials. You started tracking your calories. You stopped looking for their attention. You started watching your discipline. You replaced overthinking with reps, rumination with runs, pain with purpose. The grind wasn't glamorous. You weren't motivated. You were angry. You were tired of being seen as weak, tired of being dismissed. They laughed at your silence. You trained in it. They thought you'd fade. You sharpened, quietly, brutally. You made goals, hit them, made more, hit those too. Slowly your routine became your protection, your therapy, your foundation. You changed how you spent. No more buying to feel better. No more spending to fill holes. You budgeted. You sacrificed. You built a mindset around growth, around discipline, around the version of you they never met. You didn't care about flexing. You cared about freedom, the kind that comes from work, from grind, from commitment, when no one's clapping. Your time became sacred. You said no more often, cut out distractions, turned the phone on silent. You gave up the late nights, the gossip, the old triggers. Not because you didn't miss them, because you knew you couldn't afford them anymore. They cost your peace. They kept you in cycles. You weren't willing to stay broken just to stay familiar. You started reading again, listening, feeding your mind while you rebuilt your body. No more feeding your fears, no more nurturing doubts. You gave your energy to purpose now. Every book was another tool, every quote a reminder. You weren't crazy, you were healing, you were shifting. Spiritually, you stopped asking why. You started thanking the silence, not because it felt good, but because it revealed who was real. You started talking to God again, not asking for revenge, but for strength, for vision, for direction. You stopped begging people to understand your pain. You asked the universe to guide it, to mold it into something useful. You began to protect your energy, guard your peace like treasure. You didn't post your pain, you transformed it. You didn't complain, you trained. They still don't know how you made it, how you turned heartbreak into hustle. They don't know about the nights you cried and still got up at 5 a.m. They don't know what it took to pretend you were okay at work, to build in silence, to win without validation. You stopped explaining, started executing. You became allergic to pity, addicted to progress. The gym, your church, the grind, your gospel. You stopped living for their attention, started building a life they'd never understand. Not for revenge, for redemption, for yourself, for every time you questioned your worth. Now your eyes don't beg, they focus. Your hands don't reach out, they build. Your voice doesn't shake, it commands. Not because you became someone new, because you returned to who you were before they made you doubt it. Your circle shrank, your standards rose. You stopped texting first, stopped checking your phone. You gave your loyalty to yourself. You learned to enjoy your own company. You looked in the mirror and saw someone who survived, and you respected that person too much to slow down. The routine became your armor. The discipline became your identity. When motivation left, your habits stayed. You no longer relied on emotion, you relied on structure. They used to say you were too sensitive. Now your sensitivity is your edge. You feel everything and still perform. That's strength. They thought the silence would kill you. It built you. It refined you. They stopped clapping, so you clapped for yourself. They stopped checking in. You checked yourself every single day. Some days you broke, but you still showed up. Some days the grief came back. You still trained. You didn't rise because of motivation. You rose because you refused to be the version of you they walked away from. You didn't do it for applause. You did it because staying broken was no longer an option. And now, the very grind they never saw is the reason they'll never catch up. They'll see the results, but they'll never see the work. They'll hear about the comeback, but they'll never understand the pain it was built from. And that's okay. You didn't rise to prove a point. You rose because no one else was going to save you. You became your own rescue, your own reason, your own comeback. They never thought you'd rise, not like this, not with this kind of silence, not with this kind of discipline. They thought the pain would paralyze you, that you'd break, then beg. But instead of folding, you focused. Instead of crashing, you crafted. You became dangerous in the quiet. Not loud, not messy, controlled, composed, unreachable. You stopped explaining, stopped handing out your time like samples. You realized not everyone deserves access. Not everyone gets to see the process. The real glow-up doesn't need a stage. It starts small. It starts alone. In rooms where you sat with the weight, with memories, with regrets. You didn't rise with help. You rose with hunger. It wasn't overnight. There were days you questioned everything, nights. The silence screamed louder than the pain, but you kept showing up. You worked when no one saw, healed when no one clapped. You set goals when your mind still whispered doubts. You became obsessed with your own peace, obsessed with the version of you they never got to meet. Discipline replaced distraction. You cleaned your space, your habits, your thoughts. You cut the noise. You cut the people who lived off your doubt. You set standards, then lived by them. It was hard at first. The isolation hit hard, but you started loving the stillness, loving the control. You were no longer reacting, you were deciding. That's what made you unreachable. It wasn't money, it wasn't aesthetics. It was the shift in your energy, the way you stopped responding to chaos. You stopped entertaining fake apologies. You stopped answering to people who only noticed your worth after they lost access. That's when your glow started. Quiet, ruthless, unapologetic. You didn't post about it. You didn't broadcast it. You didn't seek validation. You just kept building. One habit, one boundary, one no at a time. You became the kind of person who doesn't just look strong. They are. Not from muscle, from mastery. Mastery of emotion, of energy, of attention. You stopped chasing closure. You gave yourself peace. They started noticing. Slowly, they checked your feed, stalked your silence, sent casual messages pretending they weren't watching, but they were. They saw the shift, the glow, the stillness, the absence of desperation, the way you moved without asking, the way you smiled without reason. They tried to come back, not out of love, out of confusion, curiosity. The control was gone. The door was gone, replaced with a wall they can't climb. That wall wasn't built with hate. It was built with self-respect. With boundaries they ignored one too many times. Now it stands between who you were and who you are. They thought they'd always have access. They gambled your loyalty, thought it would wait, thought you'd always reply, always forgive, always hope. But now they face someone new, someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't react, someone who listens to patterns, not promises, someone who lets people show themselves once and believes them. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe warmth. You owe yourself consistency. You owe yourself the version of life they tried to distract you from. That's the glow up. It's not in looks. It's in silence. It's in that calm that says, I'm good without you. And meaning it. You became unreachable because you finally reached for yourself. You realized no one was coming to save you. That love isn't supposed to hurt that much. That your peace should never come second. So you chose yourself, not out of spite, out of necessity. You turned your pain into discipline, and your discipline into power. Every early morning, every ignored text, every moment you wanted to go back but didn't. That was strength. That was healing, not the loud kind. The kind that builds slowly, in stillness, in focus, in steps no one sees. You started glowing when you stopped trying to be understood, when you stopped performing, when you started protecting your light. Now they feel the shift, not from what you post, but from what you no longer say, from the lack of access, the closed energy, the absence of reaction. You became someone they have to talk about in past tense, because there's no way forward for them anymore. You removed the option. That's what makes them panic. Not your glow, your silence, not your success, your distance. They feel irrelevant now, because they are. You no longer orbit their world. You created your own, and in it, they don't belong. Not because you're cruel, because they didn't value access when they had it. Now you protect your schedule, your peace, your space. You choose peace over people, progress over pain. You don't argue anymore. You walk away, not out of weakness, out of wisdom. You've learned where your energy goes, your life flows, and they don't get to drain you again. This version of you is sacred. It's not for everyone. Not everyone gets a second chance. Not everyone gets a reintroduction. Some people lost that right when they tested your patience too many times. And now you don't chase. You build. You ascend. You choose silence as closure. They underestimated the strength of someone who's done breaking, who's done proving, who's done hoping. That's why they don't recognize you. Because they only knew the version of you who bent, who gave, who tried. But that version had limits, and they pushed them too far. Your glow-up is quiet, intentional, private. You don't need to post the results. They'll feel them in the way you move, in the way you no longer react. You became someone who is focused, not on revenge, on results, on becoming untouchable, not for status, but for self-preservation. Now when they see you, they pause, they hesitate, because there's nothing left to reach for. You're not bitter, you're just unavailable. That's what they fear most, not your anger, your indifference. You stopped being their backup plan, their safety net, their ego boost. You outgrew their games, outgrew their silence, outgrew their patterns. Now even if they showed up different, it wouldn't matter, because you're too far gone, not in distance, in growth. You became unreachable by choosing yourself when they didn't. And now, that choice is permanent. They never expected you to make it this far, not without them, not without crawling back. They thought your silence meant defeat, that your absence meant you were broken. They couldn't see what was happening behind the quiet. While they were busy assuming, you were building. While they were laughing, you were leveling up. They didn't see the grind because you kept it private. They didn't hear the progress because it wasn't for them. It was for you. Every day you chose not to respond was a day you gained more ground. Every time you walked away instead of reacting, you became more powerful. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was, strategy. You weren't trying to win arguments. You were winning life, quietly, consistently, without applause. That's what they never understood. You didn't post about your moves. You became the move. You didn't flex your healing. You healed in silence and let the results speak. Now they're starting to notice, not through words, through shifts, through stories they hear secondhand, through people mentioning your name in places they didn't expect. That's the part that stings. Not that you're gone, that you're rising, that your name now exists in rooms they aren't invited to, in spaces they can't touch, in moments that don't involve them. You became a ghost and a legend at the same time. They ask mutual friends what you're up to. They look through profiles, hoping to see pain, hoping to find a crack. But there's nothing. No rants, no quotes, no breakdowns, just silence and success. The kind that burns slowly, the kind that doesn't need to be explained, because every win you collect is a question they don't know how to answer. Every time you grow is a reminder of what they lost. They wonder how you're still going, how you moved on, how you're doing better than before. They can't process it, because they thought they were the power. They thought walking away would destroy you. They never imagined it would free you, but it did. And now every time they think about what they had, they realize too late. It's gone. You're gone. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. They can't reach you anymore, and that's what kills them. You didn't get loud, you got better. You focused on your health. You fixed your mind. You improved your circle. You cleaned your energy. You built something they never thought you could without them. A better version of you. That's why they're still stuck in the past, trying to make sense of it. Because their ego told them you'd never rise without their validation. Their pride assumed you'd wait. But your success shattered that illusion. You didn't rush. You didn't need to. Because slow progress lasts longer. You didn't rebuild out of spite. You rebuilt because survival became growth. You stopped needing closure and started becoming the closure. That's what they don't understand. Your wins aren't just accomplishments, they're answers. Silent responses to the disrespect, to the doubts, to the absence. You let your success say everything you didn't. Now their mind races. They wonder who you became, who you're with, what you're doing. They check your posts, not to see you, but to feel you, to feel what they lost. Because now you exist like a thought they can't escape, a memory they can't touch, a name they regret saying with arrogance. You used to explain your worth. Now you simply live it. And that echo, your echo, is louder than any confrontation could have been. They used to take your presence for granted. Thought your loyalty was eternal. But now they realize your silence is forever. They were so sure you needed them, so convinced they were the prize. But when you went quiet, when you disappeared without drama, they felt it. Not all at once, slowly, when no response came, when no text returned, when no attention followed their bait. That's when the panic started. You stopped entertaining what wasn't aligned. You stopped justifying your value. You let your results speak. And now your glow is a constant reminder of their mistake. Every room you walk into with confidence, every post that radiates peace, every win they didn't expect. It's all a sentence in the story they never thought you'd write. You became your own voice, your own rescue, your own reason. You stopped waiting for a second chance. You became the one who doesn't give them. Your silence humbles people more than shouting ever could. It exposes them. It reminds them that the one they played with is the one they can't replace. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. They traded real for easy, depth for convenience. And now, your growth screams what your mouth never said. You never needed them. They needed you, and they let that go. Now you smile more, not to prove a point, because peace lives inside you now. You stopped performing love for people who never showed up fully. You stopped shrinking. You started expanding. You stopped reacting. You started creating. Your name gets brought up now not for drama, but for transformation. They remember you not as the broken one, but as the one who changed, silently, completely. They can't find you in the places they left you, because you outgrew that version. You made peace with the pain and turned it into momentum. And the people who once ignored you now want to understand you, but they can't. Because you've built a life that no longer includes explanations. Your existence is the message now. Your glow is the closure. That's how you win. Not by clapping back, not by proving them wrong directly, by becoming so whole that they question how they ever broke you in the first place, by becoming so focused that they wonder how they missed it, and you don't stop to answer. You don't pause to explain. You just keep rising, keep winning, keep building a reality so strong they're forced to watch from the outside. And in that silence they crumble, not because you wished harm, but because you healed where they expected you to hurt forever. They come back with curiosity, but they find a wall, not built out of bitterness, built out of boundaries. You're not angry anymore. You're unavailable, and your success is the proof, the echo, the thunder in the distance they can't run from. They created their own silence. They thought it would punish you, but it freed you. And now, your silence punishes them because they know, they feel it. You won, and you never said a word. They thought it was about payback, that you'd come swinging, that you'd try to throw pain the way they threw it at you, that you'd act from anger. They misunderstood everything. It was never about hurting them. It was about healing you. That was the real win. You didn't need to destroy them. You just needed to rebuild you. You stopped needing an audience. You stopped needing applause. You stopped living for validation. They thought silence was weakness. It wasn't. It was your recovery, your recalibration. While they were laughing, you were planning. While they moved on fast, you moved forward right. You chose growth. You chose standards. You chose to build something that wouldn't break the next time someone left. Your comeback wasn't meant to be loud. It was meant to be solid. Real power doesn't scream. It whispers. It hums through discipline. It shows up in the way you protect your peace, the way you stop explaining your worth, the way you don't chase anymore because you learned. Love doesn't have to beg. Loyalty doesn't need to be proven over and over. Respect isn't requested. It's required. You became calm, not because life got easy, because you got focused. Focused on your future, on your purpose, on your people, the ones who stayed, the ones who showed up, the ones who didn't need to be reminded who you are. You stopped pouring into empty hands. You stopped feeding people who only came when they were hungry. You realized revenge is temporary, legacy is permanent. Hurting them wouldn't fix the damage. But healing yourself changed the whole story. You started showing up different. You didn't just survive the betrayal. You used it. You used the sleepless nights, the overthinking, the silence, the confusion. It all became data, clarity, direction, fuel. You got sharper. You saw through manipulation quicker. You spotted red flags before they turned into regrets. You started saying no, saying less, saying nothing when silence said more. You became allergic to drama, to inconsistency, to people who don't match their words. You didn't post it. You didn't preach it. You just lived it. And that's what made them notice they couldn't predict this version of you. The version that doesn't fold. The version that doesn't wait. The version that keeps walking even when it hurts. They were banking on your breakdown. They were hoping you'd act out because that would make them feel needed, feel powerful. But you didn't give them that. You gave them distance. They checked in, pretending it was casual, but it wasn't. They felt the shift. They felt your absence in full. They watched you go from confused to certain, from soft to sharp, from always available to always evolving. And it scared them because they couldn't control it. They couldn't guilt you back into smallness. You stopped being the old you, the one who overextended, the one who said, "It's okay," when it wasn't, the one who made excuses for disrespect. That version died, and in its place came clarity, purpose, patience, strength. And you didn't announce it, you became it. That's what hit hardest. You didn't become louder, you became undeniable. Your comeback wasn't to prove anything to them. It was to remind yourself who you are. You built again, but this time differently, stronger, cleaner, with boundaries, with focus, with values that didn't bend for temporary feelings. You invested in yourself, your mind, your body, your spirit. You stopped apologizing for needing peace. Every day you chose growth. You rewrote the ending. Every time you got up, you edited the story. You became the author, not the victim. And that power, that shift, that was your revenge, not the fire, the distance, not the anger, the elevation. The glow-up was silent, but the message was loud. They may never say it, but they know, they feel it. They remember how you used to show up for them, how you always forgave, how you loved without limits, and now you're unavailable. Not because you're cruel, because you've changed, because not everyone deserves the evolved version of you. You don't give access the way you used to. You don't open up to those who only knock when they're lonely. You don't shrink to make others feel tall. You don't bleed for those who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. That's what they didn't expect. They thought you'd wait, that you'd need closure, that you'd keep coming back. But you chose your comeback over closure, your growth over explanation. You stopped asking why they hurt you. You started asking what it taught you. You stopped asking what went wrong. You started asking what's right for you now. That mental shift changed your entire life. Now they see you from a distance. They remember your softness, but they don't know your boundaries now. They don't know your focus now. And that mystery, that not knowing, haunts them more than any text or post ever could. Because you're not acting, you're becoming. And becoming doesn't need to be understood. They try to recreate the energy you gave, but they can't. It was unique, it was solid, and they broke it. Now they feel the weight of what they lost, not in hate, in silence. They feel it in every moment they wished they'd answered different, in every memory that ends in your absence. You didn't get stronger overnight. You cried through it. You bled through it. You stayed up late, questioning everything. But you didn't quit. And that's what made all the difference. You faced the mirror. You faced the pain. You didn't run from it. You ran through it. And that's what made you powerful. Now your name means something different. Not to them, to you. It means boundaries. It means purpose. It means standards. You reclaimed it, rebuilt it. You stopped being the person they walked over. You became the person who walks away, not with bitterness, with peace. Because your legacy matters more than your ego. You still have scars, but now you protect them. Now you wear them with purpose, not shame. Because every scar taught you what to never repeat, who to never let in, what to never settle for. They thought they were your lesson, but you were your own rescue. They were just the trigger. Now your life speaks, loudly, boldly, quietly, strongly. It says, I made it. I healed, I moved on, and I did it without needing revenge. I just needed my comeback, and now they watch, from the outside, wishing they had valued you when you were within reach. But now you're gone, and in your absence, they learned. You weren't just another option. You were the loss that changed everything. They didn't think it would end this way, not with silence, not with grace. They thought you'd come back. One more message, one more chance, one more moment where you'd drop your guard and let them in. But that never came. What they didn't see coming was your transformation. You didn't stay broken. You didn't stay small. You rose, quietly, fully, and you kept walking. They still look from a distance. They check your stories. They scroll through old photos. They reread messages they never replied to. But you're gone. Not just from their phone, from their future, from their reach. You didn't block them out of bitterness. You simply built so far above the noise they stopped being part of your story. They will regret it. That's not revenge. That's reality. They will feel the absence in places they never expected. In silence, in still moments, in cold nights when attention fades. when no one checks on them, that's when it hits. That's when your name comes back. Not in power, in loss. But by then you won't be thinking about them, not out of pride, out of peace. You've moved into a life that doesn't include old pages. You've outgrown the story they belong to. You no longer explain who you are. You live it. You don't revisit the pain. You've repurposed it. They'll hear your name in rooms they can't walk into. See your growth in places they'll never touch. You're not avoiding them. You're unreachable now. That's what stings the most. You didn't slam the door. You built a new house, somewhere higher, somewhere they can't find. You didn't rise for them. You rose for yourself. You didn't change because of their absence. You changed because of your worth. They'll try to act like it doesn't affect them, but it will. Regret doesn't knock loudly. It whispers in the middle of the night, in the quiet moments when ego fades and memory speaks, and it says your name. They'll remember how you showed up, how you stayed when it was hard, how you forgave what you shouldn't have. And now they'll remember the moment you stopped, not with anger, with stillness, with nothing. That's what they never expected. No drama, no closure, just distance. They thought you were waiting. They thought you were stuck, but you weren't paused. You were preparing. They thought you were lost, but you are finding something they'll never have again. Yourself. You stopped needing validation. You stopped needing answers. You stopped trying to make sense of things that weren't meant to last. Now they're stuck watching a version of you they helped create, not by building you up, but by forcing you to rise when they left you low. They didn't grow with you, so they don't get access to who you became. You didn't become someone better to prove them wrong. You became better because you remembered who you are. You don't see them anymore, not because they're invisible, because they're irrelevant, not in cruelty. In truth, they don't belong in the life you're building. They're not the lesson anymore. They're just a faded paragraph. You stopped rereading it. And that peace, that stillness, it confuses them. They expected bitterness. They expected rage. They expected attention. But all they got was silence. All they got was a ghost. Because you stopped being their story. You started writing your own, and it didn't include them. Their regret will never touch you. It won't reach your new world, because you've moved beyond recognition. You've healed in a way they'll never understand. That's the real distance, not miles. Maturity, self-worth, awareness. You stopped clinging to what could have been. You built what's meant to be. And they see it, from afar, from profiles, from whispers, from mutual friends who talk about how well you're doing. But they're not proud, they're haunted, because what they let go is now thriving, and they know they played a part in your pain, but they'll never get to share in your peace. You're not hiding, you're choosing joy, choosing growth, choosing people who show up, choosing a future where your value is seen, not debated. You used to need closure, now you need silence. You used to crave answers, now you crave alignment. They'll never say it out loud, but they'll feel it every time they remember what you were and what you became. You were love, you were real. You were the type of presence that doesn't come twice, and now they have to live knowing it's gone. You don't need to speak. Your peace speaks for you. Your progress, your strength, your discipline, your glow. It says everything you never did. It tells them you're not waiting, you're not angry, you're not broken, you're done. You don't look back, because what's ahead is too valuable, too sacred. You didn't lose them. They lost the only version of you that would have stayed. That version is gone now, and the new one, untouchable, quiet, powerful. They'll watch from afar, but you won't see them, not because you're blind, because you're focused. And that focus, that's your protection now. That's your path forward. That's what makes your comeback impossible to ignore. Without words, without revenge, just elevation, just presence, just you. They expected a reaction, a meltdown, a desperate message. They thought the pain they caused would echo, that it would define you. But they were wrong. You didn't need revenge. You became the response. You turned the pain into presence. You made silence the loudest thing they've ever heard. And that silence, that's what shook them. You didn't scream. You didn't post paragraphs. You didn't show up to prove anything. You disappeared into your growth, into your focus, into a life so full they no longer fit inside it. That's what they never saw coming. You were supposed to chase. You were supposed to explain. You were supposed to crumble. Instead, you stood up, quietly, fully, permanently. There's something about walking away without noise that terrifies those who feed on chaos. You weren't emotional. You were intentional. You gave no warning, no goodbye speech. You just stopped showing up. And every day since then, you've shown up for yourself. In every gym session, in every late night where you built instead of begged, in every small win that added up. You didn't just survive them. You replaced them with purpose. They were a chapter, not the book. They were the interruption, not the ending. And now, they live with the fact that they didn't break you. They introduced you to who you were meant to be. And that version doesn't look back. You were once the person who gave too much, who waited too long, who believed when you should have walked. That version is gone. And the new one, the one they built through their absence, that's the version that doesn't bend, that doesn't lower, that doesn't chase love that can't match its depth. They check, quietly. They lurk, hoping for signs you still care, but you don't. Not because you hate them, because you finally love yourself, fully, loudly, without apology. They lost access. That's the real loss, not your silence, your evolution. You built it all without them. The glow, the focus, the power. You became the person they didn't think you could. And now your success walks ahead of you. It speaks before you say a word. You don't need revenge. You are the comeback, and they hear it in the echo of what they let go.